Hello everybody, I do it properly now. I'm so used to it taking a moment or two before it actually appears, the picture on the screen of me. I get the background, but I don't actually get me straight away. But I figured out what the problem was. There was a setting that's meant to save resources, but it also means that it has to wait until the actual screen goes live before certain things will show up. And you caught me having my afternoon iced coffee, as well as being a little bit surprised by the fact that the image turned up straight away. Right, so how are you? We're waiting on a storm to arrive here in New Zealand. We've had storm warnings, I think, is what's happening now. If you're living on the coast, especially right down low next to the sea, just to stay aware, it's meant to be high wind levels, which means you don't leave your outdoor furniture outside unless it's really heavy, things like that. Yeah, we'll probably get news reports of people's garden sheds bowling down the street with the gusts of wind, and trampolines going for a wander all by themselves, just sort of tipping up and then rolling down the road. That tends to happen every time we have this sort of weather. Hopefully there's not too much actual serious damage. Not sure yet. We haven't got to that stage. The weather is still coming, although we did have a very, very windy day yesterday. And then it died off overnight and then it's picked up again. It's probably the next stage of the weather. So, what are we doing here? We are reading this old-fashioned book, A Regular Handful, by a lady called Jennie Chappell. It was gifted to my grandfather in 1920. And it was printed well before that. I think it was about 1911, I'm not sure. They used to keep stock for a long time of books that they printed, whereas now if you can't sell it within a certain amount of time, the bookseller, the book publisher will send it off to be trashed, which is a real waste. Sorry, a little bit warm. That's the other thing, is we've got warm weather at the moment. And yes, I don't have my library picture behind me at the moment. I thought I'd go for a change, and you just have to put up with my hair being all wispy around the edges instead of sparkly, because the green screen adapter thingy gets confused because my hair has little thin bits over the green background. So I've just got a purple background behind me, and I was hoping to get enough light on it so you could actually see the texture of it, because it's got this wave pattern on it. But the lights that I use for my photos for our products are LED workshop lights, and so they don't have a thing that stabilizes the inherent flicker that LED lights have. And so therefore it gives you the flickery shadows across the screen, so I'm not using that. Anyway, that's fine. Ugh. And digging into other settings to find out why it was that if I got out of the screen, you could see the blanket behind me really easily with all the pattern and everything, and then as soon as I came into screen, it all went dark. Apparently because my computer has, outside of the broadcasting program, it actually has two different apps that it's using for my webcam, the old original one and one that I hacked so that it would actually work for this camera instead of the horrible one, the original, which still was having an influence. Anyway, enough of that sort of weird information, which you don't really need, but it's all stuff that's part of my day-to-day life, doing this sort of thing. What are we doing? We're reading this book, A Regular Handful. It's about three children actually, but two of them whose father has gone missing 9 years ago, before the boy was born. 3 months before the boy was born, he disappeared. He was on some expedition somewhere, scientific expedition, I think, and his older sister, and their mother is normally at home with them, and she works as an artist and paints porcelain and all sorts of things like this, trying to make some money to look after them, because it's back in the day and age when there was not financial support for anyone who was on their own with children. So Dad's gone missing, presumed dead, and Mum has had a telegram to say that her mother up in Scotland is very, very ill. You better come quickly, because otherwise it might be too late, which is a bit scary. And it happened in the middle of the night, so she disappeared and it shocked the children because when they got up in the morning to have her birthday party with her, she wasn't there. And so it's them trying to behave themselves, trying to do things, trying to cope with the boarder that they have with them, who's basically, I think, a 2 or 3 year old that lives with them. His mother, I think, had died, and he lives with his father, but to give him a little bit of a social setting with a more family style thing, so he's not just with the childminder during the day when Dad's working. He lives with this family, and there is a small fee paid to them to help with that, and so that's probably why the child is with them, to help with that family income, because they don't really have anything. Anyway, so yeah, the boy, the main boy in the story, known as Leslie or Les, is the one referred to as being a regular handful, always getting into trouble in one way or another. And if you're new here, hi, I'm Jev. I read old-fashioned children's stories, in case you hadn't, and kind of ramble on a lot. I've been doing it for nearly 2 years now, live on Twitch, put them over on YouTube afterwards, turn them into playlists for each book, which you can have a look at if you want to. And if you miss the story here and you're too late to get the replay to be able to watch it as a recording on Twitch, then you can go over to YouTube and it'll be over there 2 weeks after I've recorded it here. So there you go. I welcome lurking, because when you're listening to a story, you're not required to chat. And when I'm reading you a story, I'm not required to chat, although I will interrupt myself and explain things if I think it's appropriate, because the author hasn't explained it, or in this day and age, it's something that's really different to what we're used to. So we had a word last time, which I asked if anyone was listening, if they wanted to look it up and then put it into the chat, I would read out the definition, but nobody did at the time. But the word was embrocation, because the boarder had fallen, bruised themselves, and the older sister wanted to put some of Mother's embrocation on it because it helps with soothing bruises, and they had run out. And so I was saying, do you know what an embrocation is? And I was fairly certain I did. It's kind of like ointment, but it's liquid, and you put it onto the skin to soothe aches and pains, either in joints or in bruises. Very, very old-fashioned, but nonetheless still effective. And it's just that we've got so much that's commercially prepared now, we don't have them. Another name for that sort of thing is, and it's not entirely the same, but the two words can be used interchangeably for some settings, is liniment. There you go. 2 new words for you, 2 new old words for you. Embrocation and liniment. So if you need to, go and get a pencil and paper, or even a pen and paper, so you can write down things you want to look up, and get yourself something to drink. This is my water bottle. I'm just splashing it all over myself here, just as well it's water. Something to drink. Water is great. Keeps your brain working and keeps your body working as well. Something to snack on, just because it's nice to have something to snack on when you're listening to a story. And if you're not having to stand up and move around while you're working or something like that, then somewhere comfortable to sit, and then we'll get going. And I don't, as I said before, I don't generally chat while I'm reading, although I will explain things. But between chapters, if anyone's here and they're wanting to talk about anything, I'll quite happily chat. But we try to keep it family friendly, because these are children's books, and there are people who listen to them with their children and their grandchildren. And it's nice to have something that they can listen to without it being a problem. So thank you. And we'll carry on. So, A Regular Handful, or Ruthie's Charge, by Jennie Chappell. And I've got the right information up there now. Up there on the overlay. Last week I'd forgotten to change it, but I've got it right now. And this is chapter 5, Better Than His Dessert. And what had happened was that Leslie was off to get this embrocation from Mother's doctor, who lives in another suburb near them, but not right where they are. He had some money for catching the train to get to the place, but had missed the train because he was looking at something in a shop window. and heard two gentlemen talking and asking where somewhere was, and it's the suburb that he needs to go to get this embrocation, this liniment, and they have this wonderful looking motor car over there that they're going to be travelling to, supposedly, to this suburb in. So they go into this place where they can get something to drink, have something to drink. They've been talking to the keeper of the place, pub, cafe, something, I'm not quite sure what. And then they come out and hop in the car. And in the meantime, Leslie has hopped into the back seat of the car and hidden underneath it. It's a vintage car by our standards. And some of those there's room underneath the seats. So you can squish down and get underneath the seat and hide. And so that's what Leslie has done, because he's thinking, since I've missed the train, this will save me having to walk or run there. And I'll still be able to be back in time to do the things I was going to do today. So, chapter 5, better than his dessert. And I'll read you the very last, just to round up what I've rounded up. I'll read you the very last sentence from the previous chapter. Leslie felt like a mouse in the works of a great clock that was just going to strike. There was a rattle, a bang, a toot-toot, and the stowaway felt himself being whirled along at almost railroad speed in the direction, as he supposed, of Cedars Park, which is a suburb. By the way, if you're wondering time period, it's probably about the turn of the century, the 19th to the 20th century, and therefore Edwardian, late Victorian or Edwardian period. And when you see, later on you'll see, possibly, not today, a picture of the two children walking down the road, and by looking at the little girl's dress, yes, definitely looks like it's Edwardian period. Sorry, I'm looking at my coffee. It's bubbles floating on top, not ants. Anyway, it's just coffee and milk. Chapter 5, better than his dessert. It cannot be said that Leslie had a very enjoyable ride. It was most uncomfortable to lie all huddled up on the dusty floor. But once, just as he was going to put up his head to look round, one of the gentlemen turned to reach for a rug that was lying on the seat above him, and in terror of being discovered, he screwed himself still further out of sight and dared not peep out any more. Nevertheless, as his legs got pins and needles and his back began to ache, he kept telling himself that it was no end of a lark, and to picture the sensation he should create among his schoolfellows on Monday morning. Yes, such a possibility of things to talk about, to brag about. And he would make Ruth guess how he had gone to Cedars Park and say no to everything, train, tram, running, walking, or a lift in the baker's cart that she would suggest. She could never dream he went in a motor, the common term for a motor car, or what we would call now a car. He would make her puzzle her head over it all day, but they seemed a good while getting to Alexandra Avenue, which is, they were actually looking for Alexandra Avenue in Cedars Park, which is why he did it. It was a long road, certainly, and Leslie began to wonder which end of it the motorists would stop. If they carried him to the further end, he would have a good way to walk back. This had not occurred to him before. The next thing he wondered was whether he would be able to get out without being seen, and what would happen if he were caught. Still on and on went the motor, with a roar and a rush, and rattle and bump, and if it were wound up to go round, as if it were wound up to go round the world without stopping. They must have got to Cedars Park by this time. Suppose the gentleman who was driving had after all missed the way and passed Alexandra Avenue without noticing it. Leslie at last got into such a fever of nervousness, besides feeling by this time unbearably cramped and stifled, at all the risks he must venture at all risks he must venture out and see whereabouts they were. So, still creeping on hands and knees, he craned his neck far enough beyond the edge of the seat to see the kind of road through which they were going. It was open country, with fields and hedges on both sides of the way. At least, so Leslie supposed, for at at least, so Leslie supposed, for at that speed that they were now running, all he could see was a broad green streak on either hand, broken every few seconds by the flash past of a group of trees, much as one sees the banks of a cutting from a railway train. In his dismay, he sprang to his feet and stood upright. Then he saw that it was indeed a real country road along which they were spinning, with not even a house in sight. But he had hardly realised this bewildering fact before, with a frantic toot, 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 they dashed through a village, scattering children, dogs, and chickens in a cloud of dust, then on between hedgerows and hayricks again, faster and ever faster, as it seemed to the terror-stricken boy, who knew now that mile after mile was being added to the distance between him and home. Leslie dreaded to show himself. He dared not ask the gentleman to stop, yet every minute of delay made matters worse. He felt almost frantic and might even have been rash enough to try and jump out of the vehicle and been killed on the spot. But all at once, turning the page, the anticipation. All at once there was a sound of an explosion, a sudden jerk that flung him against the back of the gentleman in front, and the motor car came to an abrupt standstill. Both the travellers looked round sharply. The driver in consternation at the stopping of the motor, his friend much startled at feeling a strange hand gripping his shoulder. For Leslie had instinctively caught hold to prevent himself from being flung into the road. "Who are you?" demanded the gentleman in surprise at finding himself face to face with the small boy. "Where on earth have you sprung from?" "Oh, please, sir," said Leslie, with tears in his eyes, "don't be angry. Don't have me locked up. I'm a very respectable boy. I am indeed. I'm just going to Dr. Mason's for a bottle of stuff, and I'll never do it again." "Not do it again, indeed," roared the owner of the motor. He was a big, stout man, now purple with rage and alarm, for he had never driven such a vehicle before, and had not the least idea what had happened. "You might have been the death of us, you mischievous young imp." At this, Leslie burst into tears. It was plain that the stout man believed him to be the cause of the accident. For all he knew, he could not say that he was not. He could only sob, "Oh, please don't have me locked up. I'll never do it again." "Indeed you shall be locked up," retorted the angry motorist, "and that before you're many hours older. Keep tight hold of the little villain, John, and see that he doesn't escape. There'll be a policeman here directly, and we'll give him in charge." That means hand him over to be arrested. "It's disgraceful that people's lives should be endangered by the monkey tricks of young hooligans like that." He had paused a moment for a suitable word, and that was what he hit upon. Hooligans. A much stronger word back then, implying a lot of danger in terms of the person's behaviour. And here I have to say, I'm very sorry, but we are missing 2 pages, 1 sheet. And so we have to guess at what comes next, and then we shall carry on with the story. So just imagine what went through this little bit here, and you'll probably be able to get a bit of an idea just from the way the rest of the chapter carries on. So the last sentence we had was, he paused a moment for a suitable word, and that was what he hit upon, which is hooligans. So the next bit we pick up on is, "We can make that all right, I dare say," said the stranger. "Come along, I shall have plenty of time to do it. I've no doubt, before my friend here is ready to start on his travels again." So I would say on the previous 2 pages, we've actually learned a little bit about why Leslie is in the car and where he's trying to get to, and that there is a bit of a time limit because he wanted to go and spend some time with a friend of his taking part in or watching a paper chase, which is where people run cross country chasing after somebody else who's ahead of them, who's dropping pieces of paper along the way so that they can follow it. A little bit like a fox trail, but without violence and dogs and horses and foxes and anything else like that. So yeah, it seemed to be a sort of a certain sort of school activity for a certain age group of people. There was a paper chase in the story, one of the earliest stories we had, which was called The Railway Children. And there's an explanation of what they are in there. If you want to have a listen to that, go and have a look for my playlist, The Railway Children, by E. Nesbitt, I think it is. And have a listen to that story because there is a paper chase in that one. It's quite crucial to the story in some ways. "We can make that all right, I dare say," said the stranger. "Come along, I shall have plenty of time to do it, I've no doubt, before my friend here is ready to start on his travels again." So obviously the other guy's fixing the car. "Then you're not going to send for a policeman?" ventured Leslie, still only half reassured. "Not this time, I think," replied the gentleman, who looked as if he were trying not to laugh, because you don't generally give children to a policeman. "I didn't do anything to the works. Really and truly I didn't," said Leslie. "No, I don't fancy you did. But," continued this new friend, "let me warn you never to try to get a ride again without paying the fare. That's what that rascal XYZ is always doing, and he's always getting caught and punished for it." "Who is XYZ?" asked Leslie. XYZ. Trotting along now beside Mr. John and feeling almost happy. "Oh, there are bills up at nearly every railway station that tell about his misdeeds and how many shillings he has been fined or how long imprisonment he has had. You look out and you'll see them. But now, Jack, tell me, how many of you are there at home?" "There are 4 of us," answered Leslie. He's given a different name because he's getting in trouble, he thought. He's not giving all of the information and he's not giving it correctly. So this chap is calling him Jack, not Leslie. "There are 4 of us," answered Leslie. "That's Mother and Ruth, only Mother is away at Grandma's, and me and Bobby. And the servant, of course, she makes 5. "Ruth is a pretty name," said the gentleman. "It's Mother's name too," said Leslie, growing more confidential as he felt more at his ease. "It is my favourite name of all names in the world," said his companion thoughtfully. "The very sweetest, I think. And your father?" "Father is dead," said Leslie, adding with childish irrelevance, "Ruth is 12 going on for 13 and Bobby is 5. I'm 10 next birthday. Only Bobby—" What more Leslie said was drowned in the deafening shriek of a railway whistle, for they were close to the station now. "Hurry up," cried Mr. John. "The signal has dropped. There's an up train coming in now." He strode towards the booking office and Leslie ran by his side. Mr. John just managed to get the boy's ticket and bundle him into the train in the nick of time. In his haste and excitement, Leslie quite forgot to say, "Thank you," but he put his head out of the window and smiled and waved his hand as long as the gentleman's kind brown face was in sight. Obviously, he's been spending a lot of time in the sun, this gentleman, and I think that's another part of the description that we missed. Leslie had never in his life seen anybody, any stranger that is, whom he liked so much. He was back home before Ruth returned from school, so she had not time to be anxious about him, and her disappointment at not getting the liniment was lost in her admiration at the wonderful adventure Leslie had to relate. And Bobby's knee was already better, so it did not so much matter. "Oh," said Leslie rather blankly, and at once felt, as he ought, rather ashamed at his keen satisfaction in getting— No, missed a bit. Did not so much matter. That's about the imprecation. "But you ought to have asked the gentleman's name and address," she said, "so that we could send him what he paid for your fare." "Oh," said Leslie, rather blankly, and at once felt, as he ought, rather ashamed at his keen satisfaction in getting sent home for nothing. "Well, his name was Mr. John something, but I took jolly good care he didn't know mine, in case that raggy old pal of his should want to come and make a row. I say, though, that motor did go at a pace. You should have seen it." He likes excitement, and that's why he's referred to as being a bit of a regular handful. And now that's the end of that chapter, and I'm going to have something to drink and try and just— You know how sometimes you'll get a finger or a thumb that just feels like it needs to click because it's slightly uncomfortable? Yeah, that's what my thumb's doing at the moment. Anyway. Not a problem. I'm going to have something to drink and then have something else to drink. Right? You can do that too. And if you didn't get any before, now's your time. Go off, grab yourself something to drink, something to eat, and then we'll carry on reading. So, I was going to tell you something. Those of you still here. If you're new here, or if you just arrived, you're most welcome to lurk. That's why I've got that in the title of the thing. You don't have to say that you're here and lurking, but if you want to, that's fine. Which is just exclamation mark lurk, and I think there's a message that comes up, and thanks you for being here, something like that. Anyway, but yeah, you're welcome to be here. You're welcome to lurk, because this is what happens when you're listening to a story: is you listen to the story, don't you? And if you are having to work and you're able to listen, welcome. I love reading for people, and I have no problem at all with the fact that you may not be able to, that you're not entirely focused on what I'm doing, because I'm not going to give you a school test on this. I'm not requiring you to pay attention or anything like that. If you want to listen to me while you're in the middle of doing something like reading, reading doesn't work very well when you're listening to reading. Doing crafts is a good one. Housework. My daughter always listens to audiobooks when she's doing sewing projects and when she's doing housework. I've got other friends who also listen to stories being read aloud, not audiobooks, but more like this sort of thing when they're working. And others who, when they're actually doing jobs that they need to do, but they want something that keeps their mind occupied while their hands are busy working. So, welcome, listen, enjoy yourself. Yay, the temperature has dropped slightly. I'm relieved. I don't enjoy it being too hot. And too hot for us in this part of New Zealand is nowhere near as hot as too hot in Australia. I just heard that it went up to, was it 45 or 50 degrees? 45 degrees, I think, in one part of Australia today, or was going to be. It's not nice when it's like that. It's just so draining. Not pleasant at all. So we're going to carry on with the reading. Sorry, I've got to put something down here somewhere. And we shall carry on reading. There. We're up to Chapter 6. A Regular Handful by Jennie Chappell. Chapter 6. An Unlucky Outing. Interesting. After Leslie's adventure in the motor car, things went smoothly on the whole for a week. There were sundry risks and rescues, certainly, and Ruth, Hannah declared, was growing visibly thinner with the weight of her anxieties. Now, Ruth is the older sister. She's the one who was 12, did they say? He was telling the chap in the car, when they were walking along the road to get to the train station. Ruth is 12, going on 13, and Bobby, their boarder, is 5, and the chap who was telling the gentleman is 10. So here we go. There were sundry risks and rescues, certainly, and Ruth, Hannah declared, Hannah's the housekeeper, was growing visibly thinner with the weight of her anxieties. But the worst disaster that really happened, if we set aside the breaking of Mother's carved book slide by Bobby, who was dragging it round the garden as a van laden with large stones. Don't know what a book slide is, do you? You can look that one up. Put it in the chat if you want, or over in our Discord server. And somebody can put the link for that in the chat. When the book slide, dragging it around the garden as a van laden with large stones, was when Bobby said, the way words are written, the way language is used in older books, if you come in halfway through a sentence, doesn't make sense. It makes more sense from the beginning. But anyway, was the said Bobby, in the capacity of warhorse to General Leslie, was compelled to eat so much grass and leaves that he became very sick, and for an hour or two Ruth feared horribly that he might have swallowed something poisonous. Have you made your little brother or sister eat grass and leaves as part of a game? What was the result? Oh dear. I know the cat throws up if he's had too much of that sort of thing. However, a powder and a night's rest worked a complete cure. A powder was before the days of commonly compounded tablets and capsules. They didn't have capsules the way we do. You would often get a powder from the chemist, and it's actually literally it is the medication that you need in powder form, put all folded up in a little wee envelope of paper, and then you tip it into some liquid, stir it up, and then drink it, or something like that, usually. Anyway, so taking a powder. However, a powder and a night's rest worked a complete cure. His knee, hurt by his fall downstairs over the burglar trap, had quite left off being stiff, and the bruises were passing so satisfactorily through the greeny-yellow stage of fading away. That was why the embrocation was wanted, was to help to speed up the getting rid of the bruising and the aches and pains that were with it. That Ruth hoped that they would have entirely disappeared before her mother's return. It was going to be awkward, having mother come back and having Bobby all bruised up. So, yeah, she does hope that they're going to be faded before mother comes back. Not that she for a moment wished to hide the fact of the accident, but she felt a great ambition so to fulfill her trust with regard to their little charge, that's Bobby, as to be able to present him whole and undamaged at the end of her term of office. Being the oldest and the sister, she's the one who's expected to keep an eye on the others and keep things in order. The daily letters from Edinburgh, at least to the children, were cheerful and reassuring. Grandma was getting steadily better, and as mother did not say anything about herself, it did not occur to them to suppose she could be other than as well as usual. In private notes to Hannah, however, Mrs. Morell mentioned that she had had 2 fainting fits since she had been away and was anxious to get to her own home again. They made me see mother's doctor on my own account yesterday, she wrote in one letter to the old servant. After that bad attack, he said I needed 6 weeks perfect rest or he wouldn't answer for the consequences. He said I am completely run down, but doctors all say that nowadays to get everybody to rest as much. But doctors all say that nowadays to everybody, don't they? It's a sort of fashion they've got, and I do rest as much as I can. I must do my best to provide for the darlings while I am spared to them. So yes, she's working herself very hard to make enough money to pay for the rent and the food and everything else like that. That's what this is about. Sorry, I got lost on the page again. I must do my best to provide for the darlings while I am spared to them. If I could only be sure of living to see them both educated and in a fair way for supporting themselves. But there, if we could see, there would be no room for faith in God, would there? And He has been so good to us all along, and we know He always will be, that it is ungrateful and wicked to have an anxious care about the future at all. So she really doesn't think that she's well at all if she's saying that she's hoping to carry on long enough that the children can get a reasonable education. She really genuinely doesn't think that she's going to live a long time. So she is concerned about her health. Hannah, reading this alone in the kitchen when the children had gone to school, wiped her eyes with the corner of her apron and shook her head and sighed, "Poor dear, poor dear." On Saturday morning came at last the longed-for news that, if all went well, Mrs. Morell hoped to reach home between 6 and 7 that evening. "Oh, today, cried Ruth rapturously. "Before we go to bed again, we shall see Mother." She caught hold of Bobby's arms and jumped him round and round till giddy and out of breath. They collapsed together on the sofa. "Don't you wish you hadn't eaten the cake, Leslie? If we'd got it now, we should be going out this morning to buy the little pink candles. I've got 6pence. She had never quite got over her disappointment about the illuminated cake. "I vote we all go to the station to meet her," said Leslie. "Wouldn't it be a jolly surprise?" "We can't. She won't come to our station, only to the big London terminus and the rest of the way in a cab, or a bus more likely." Yes, because cabs aren't cheap. "But we can go by bus and meet her there," argued Leslie. "We've got sixpence. You've got sixpence and I've got fourpence halfpenny. It's only twopence each way. If Hannah gives us 3 halfpence more, it'll be enough." "Oh, no, Leslie," said Ruth. "I'm sure Mother would much rather we didn't. Besides, we want to get the house ready and help Hannah lay the tea and put out all the presents. We must keep Mother's birthday directly she comes home, you know." "You and Bobby can do that," persisted Leslie obstinately. "I shall go to the city and meet Mother, whether you choose to or not." "I want to go and meet Mummy," chimed in Bobby. "Ruthie, I'm going with Leslie to meet Mummy in the bus." This was worse and worse. "It is a shame of you, Leslie," Ruth protested, "to put such ideas into Bobby's head. You couldn't possibly go alone to a place like that. There are such crowds and crowds of people and cabs and buses. At a station like that, you'd be sure to be run over and killed, and Mother doesn't expect you and wouldn't be looking out for you. And if you didn't happen to see her, you'd never find her. And just imagine, no, just think, and just think what a state of mind she'd be in if she came home and heard you were lost." "I shouldn't get lost. I never knew anybody like you for spoiling everybody's fun," grumbled the boy. "I daren't let you go," said Ruth firmly. "I'm sure Mother wouldn't like it." "We shall see," rejoined Leslie, and thrusting his hands in his pockets with a defiant air, he went to the window and stood looking out and whistling very loud. "You can't stop me going if I make up my mind." There was a red spot on both of Ruth's cheeks, and for a minute or two she felt so angry she longed to give her brother a good shaking. But it seemed dreadful to quarrel the very day Mother was coming home. "Look here, Leslie," she said presently, in quite a friendly way. "I've a much jollier idea than that. Wouldn't you like to decorate the room with flowers? If we could get branches of may to put into your blue vases, they'd look simply lovely." Now, may is a type of tree or hedge plant that flowers in May. It's funny that. And looks quite lovely and can be used to decorate your house. Imagine Japanese paintings which have like a vase and then a twisty piece of stem of something with flowers on it, a few flowers and leaves, usually cherry blossom. A similar sort of a look to that in some ways, but that would be much more stylized than what May actually is. May to put into your blue flower vases. They'd look simply lovely. Let's all go this afternoon on the top of the tram to Heather Green and walk in the fields there and get a heap of buttercups and daisies and bluebells and come home and make the table look grand. You know how fond Mother is of wild flowers." "Oh, yes," said Bobby. "Let's go on a tram and pick buttercups and daisies, Leslie. You and me'll go, Ruthie, won't we, eh?" "All right, we'll all go," said Leslie, not at all sorry to have a good excuse for changing his plan. Don't think he'd thought about how easily you'd get lost if you're up in the city on your own as a child. And Ruth's explanation might have helped him realise this. So after an early dinner, the 3 set out, each carrying a basket, and Bobby looking a perfect cherub in his best white drill sailor suit with the pale blue silk collar. Ruth wanted to have saved this to put on him when they came back, and he was got ready to see Mother. But he had been helping Leslie tidy up the summer house all the morning, and his blue suit that he had been wearing for this work was far too dirty to go out in, and his Holland ones were both at the wash. Obviously, it's a particular type of fabric, but it's called Holland. However, she thought if she looked after him well, there would be no occasion to get the clean clothes soiled in the fields, and he had promised to be very careful. A jaunt by the tram car to Heather Green was a rather rare treat for the Morell children, who as a rule had to content themselves with outings that cost nothing. It was only her anxiety to keep Leslie within bounds that prompted Ruth to such a piece of extravagance today. The weather was gloriously fine, and the ride, which they had not taken since the previous summer, was delightful. It seemed to have lasted not more than 5 minutes when the unwelcome "all change here" of the conductor warned them that the end was reached, though in reality they had been travelling about half an hour. "I say," said Leslie, as a short walk brought them in sight of their favourite spot, "what's up here? It usedn't to look like this." "They've taken away the stile and put in an iron gate," said Ruth. "It isn't half so pretty." "And they've made a silly old gravel path and stuck a lot of railings all round," added Leslie in disgust. "I hate railings." "And look, there's a board up," chimed in Ruth again. "I wonder what it says. Something horrid, I dare say. Notice boards always do." For in the interval since the children's last visit to Heather Green, the fields they loved had been turned into a public recreation ground, with the usual restrictions. "Oh dear, we shan't get any bluebells after all," said Ruth blankly as she read the printed notice. "Visitors are requested not to touch the trees or shrubs, and the picking of flowers is strictly forbidden." "Oh, bother! What a shame!" exclaimed Leslie. "And there's heaps of them there. Look, under the trees, and a jolly lot of May." "I wish we hadn't come," said Ruth. "We might have spent the money on flowers from a shop. You get lovely big bunches of daffodils and wallflowers for a penny at Wheeler's." "I vote we don't bother about that silly old board," said Leslie. "Why shouldn't we have a few bluebells? They're as much ours as anybody else's, and there's nobody to see if you take any or not." "There's sure to be a keeper around somewhere," said Ruth, "and even if there wasn't, it wouldn't be right to do what is forbidden." "Why not? We always used to." "I suppose the place belongs to somebody now, and they want to keep it nice for everybody. I mean," continued Ruth, who thought about things and was reasonable instead of being impulsive, like a certain somebody we know, "I expect such lots of people come here now that if everybody picked flowers, there would soon be none left to look pretty. But I am sorry, I was so counting on some May to put in your blue vases, Leslie. What shall we do? Just have a nice walk and go back again. We shall have had the outing anyhow." But this was far from satisfactory to Leslie, and he continued to cast such covetous eyes at the hawthorns, white with bloom, that's May, and the bluebells among the long grass of the little wood, that Bobby, who was always his echo, began to whine, "I want some flowers. I want to pick some pretty flowers." And Ruth, as usual, found her handful decidedly too much for her. "Let's sit down on this seat," she said, "and I'll tell you a story." "Oh, yes," cried Bobby, wriggling himself onto the bench with encouraging alacrity. "Come on, Leslie. Rufie's going to tell us a story." "A fairy story, eh, Rufie?" "No, tell us one about pirates," demanded Leslie. "I'll tell you a fairy one first, anyhow, and then we'll see," said Ruth, hoping to gain time. So, with Bobby cuddled contentedly within the circle of her arm, and Leslie perched upon the back of the seat, pretending not to listen, but amusing himself by tickling their necks and ears with a blade of grass, Ruth spun somehow a little yarn about some children who went into the woods to gather flowers to adorn a birthday feast, and when they got there they saw some bushes covered with clusters of transparent red berries, like red currants, only as big as grapes. And they ate some, and as soon as they had eaten them, their eyes began to itch, and they rubbed them, and then they saw that what they took to be flowers were not flowers at all, but fairies, lovely little things with bright green skirts on and wings all colours of the rainbow. It was their wings that had looked so like the petals of flowers, some pink, some white, and some blue, and the fairies all went down on their knees and held up their tiny hands and said in the weeest of voices, altogether just like the sound of the wind rustling in a field of oats, "Oh, please don't hurt us. Don't hurt us." For the poor little things knew that human beings often drag them away from their sisters and brothers and their homes and keep them crowded up in glass prisons, standing up to their necks in water till they die. "But these children," continued Ruth, "were kind and pitied the poor fairies and did not take one of them. 'We'll leave them to live and be happy,' they said. 'We won't have anybody dying at our feast.' But when they got home, what do you think? there was a great surprise. The table was loaded with the most beautiful cakes you ever saw. "With sugar on top," interrupted Bobby. "Yes, every one had pink or white sugar on the top and a crystallized fruit in the middle. And instead of flowers, there were rows and rows of teeny tiny coloured lights like stars, blue as the sky, or ruby red, or yellow like amber, or green like the sun shining through leaves, all as beautiful and bright and sparkly as the colours on the glass drops of the chandelier when the sun shines on them. And where's Leslie off to? Les, come back. I've not done yet. Where are you going?" This abrupt query was caused by her brother taking a sudden leap from his perch and darting away among the trees. "I know, he's catching a butterfly," said Bobby, instantly forgetting fairies and flowers and everything else in his boy-like instinct for the chase. He, too, broke away from Ruth and plunged in among the grass and bracken in pursuit of Leslie. The next moment, both were lost to sight. It was rather disappointing to the storyteller to be thus unceremoniously deserted by her audience at the very climax of her tale. But even while she stood staring after them in blank dismay, a succession of piercing screams in the unmistakable voice of Bobby announced that some alarming disaster had taken place. And that's the end of the chapter, but not today's reading. So what that means is time for a drink. And if you've got it, time for a snack. Sorry, my hair is itching me at the moment. I'm going to see if I can move it in such a way that it's not going to. It's not really helping. And once you start feeling itchy, you feel itchy in other places as well. So that's why my nose, I think, was itchy before. I'm not hearing wind in the chimney at the moment. I'm hearing cars on the road, which is good, I think. Right, we shall carry on. There we go. A Regular Handful by Jennie Chappell, Chapter 7, Sperrited Away. Odd. We'll find out what that means in a minute. "What is it? What is it? Where are you?" asked Ruth excitedly as she rushed in the direction from which the cries came. She had not far to seek. There was a small pond hidden in the copse, always shallow, now almost dry. There's another word for you. Did you write that one down? Copse. C-O-P-S-E. I think it's copse, not copse. There was a small pond hidden in the copse, always shallow, now almost dry, and into this Bobby, in his eagerness, had somehow slipped, because he was chasing after Leslie. When Ruth reached the spot, Leslie was dragging him up the bank, a deplorable object, all the back of his nice white suit, wet with mud and green slime, the tears raining down his piteous face, and one hand bleeding from the scratches of a bramble he had clutched in a vain attempt to save himself from falling. That was probably why he shrieked. "Oh, Leslie," exclaimed Ruth, "what have you been doing with him?" "I've done nothing," said Leslie. "He came tearing after me and didn't look where he was going. But it's all your fault. You knew he'd be sure to follow you." Sorry, I'm just going to tilt my camera slightly. It's better because I'm sitting back. My back was getting sore. "I've done nothing. He came tearing after me and he didn't look where he was going." "But it's all your fault. You knew he'd be sure to follow you. I shall just tell Mother what a plague you've been to me all the while she's been away." "I haven't. It isn't my fault." "I couldn't help it," contradicted Leslie. "Yes, you could. If it hadn't been for you, we shouldn't have come here today at all, only you worried so about going to meet Mother. And now she'll come home and find him looking like this. Yes, that's right. This is because... Why is my camera bouncing? Doesn't normally. Sorry. I think it's just balanced rather than clipped properly. And so therefore it's bouncing. We'll see if that works better. Sorry. This is meant to be the afternoon that Mother's coming home that evening. That's the extra bit of why Ruth is finding it a little bit hard at the moment. Yes, you could. If it hadn't been for you, we shouldn't have come here today at all. And only you worried so about going to meet Mother, and now she'll come home and find him looking like this. Ruth had been rocking and cuddling Bobby with the greatest tenderness while she poured out her anger, not undeservedly, upon the culprit Leslie. Now the hopeless condition of the white suit and the impossibility of making the little fellow anything like presentable, not to speak of having to show him, after all her care, with a bandaged hand, seemed to suddenly overwhelm her, and she sat down on the grassy bank with Bobby in her arms and began to cry likewise. Leslie strolled some little distance away and, turning his back on the weeping pair, proceeded to whistle shrilly and contemplate the landscape. He did not want any passer-by to suppose that they were anything to do with him. It looked very unfeeling, but in his heart he was quite upset by the sight of Ruth's tears. She was not the sort of girl to blub at everything, as he sometimes proudly assured his friends, so when she did give way, it was the more impressive. She did not cry for long, however. What was the good? Very soon Leslie heard her call, quite calmly, though with displeasure, and a quiver still in her voice. "Come, Leslie, we're going home now." In silence, Bobby, still subdued and sobbing, and stiffly carrying one hand bound up in Ruth's handkerchief, the little party made their way back to the tramcars. Ruth's anger was never long-lived, but the embers flared up afresh when Leslie burst out laughing at the spectacle Bobby's back view presented, and thus set the injured youth off howling again, being Bobby. "We ought to have been so happy today," she said severely, "and we should have been, but everything is spoilt, all through you. I don't see anything funny in that. No, we're not going on the top of the car. Bobby's things are quite wet, and he might catch cold." It's all right. I was going to explain something, but the story does. "You can go where you like. I don't care. Bobby and I are going inside." So there's an upstairs and a downstairs on the tram, obviously. But this was not sufficient to prevent Leslie mounting the outer stair of the vehicle with a considerable show of cheerfulness. As there was no other passenger on the top of the car just then, and he could change about from seat to seat as his fancy led him, there was every prospect of a very enjoyable ride. What was actually to result therefrom, he little guessed. Both Ruth and Bobby got over a good deal of their trouble during the journey home. Bobby in kneeling upon the cushions and watching the road, Ruth in shielding him in the corner where she had placed him from the amused or sympathetic glances of their fellow travellers, and in lovingly looking forward to the meeting with her dear mother, which, after all, a small disaster like this could not really cloud. It was not a usual time of the day for people to be returning home from Heather Green. The stream of half-holiday folk was flowing the other way. So when they reached the end of their journey, it happened that there was nobody to get out of the car but themselves. Ruth expected Leslie to come scuttling down from above in his usual breakneck style. But no Leslie appeared. She waited a minute or two. The horses were turned and the vehicle prepared to start again, but there was no sign of him. "Leslie, make haste down," she called. "You'll be taken back again if you don't hurry." But there was no answer. "Oh dear." She stepped away to the pavement and looked up at the top seats of the car. All were vacant, or rather were being rapidly filled up by fresh passengers. She was quite sure that Leslie had not got down without her seeing him. Where, then, could he be? She ventured to approach the conductor and ask him if he knew what had become of her brother. "I remember him going up right enough at the start of the journey and you paying for him," said the man, "but I never seed no more of him. Didn't he get off at one of the stops?" "Oh, no," said Ruth, "I'm sure of that. I sat in the corner by the door, and he couldn't have come down the steps without my seeing him. Besides, he wouldn't want to. He wanted to come all the way home." "He's been spirited away, then, miss, by the hair of his head, I should think," said the man, grinning. Then he pulled the bell strap, and the car started off again, leaving Ruth standing, perfectly bewildered, alone with Bobby, in the middle of the road. She remembered Leslie's prank with the motor. Was it possible that he had repeated his trick of hiding under the seat in order to get another ride free of charge? She could not fancy it. And besides, what would the object of it be, unless— Indeed, and here an idea flashed into Ruth's mind that made her grip Bobby's hand and set off running after the disappearing car, the tram car, for all she was worth. It had suddenly struck her that if Leslie got down at the crossways about half a mile along the road, he could at once get an omnibus, that's a bus, that would take him to the railway station at which their mother would arrive, and at as nearly as possible the right time to meet her. Could he really have been so wilful and naughty as to make the attempt? He could, by stooping, have easily hidden himself when on the top of the car from anybody standing on the pavement, and taken his seat again as soon as the vehicle had safely started. Ruth's heart grew hot with anger, as for a minute or two it seemed quite possible that Leslie had actually played this trick upon her, and she dragged Bobby along till his feet hardly touched the ground. It was absurd for Ruth to think she could ever overtake the tramcar and stop her brother, yet she ran. It was a sort of relief to her feelings. But as it happened, the car was compelled to halt when about halfway to the next stopping place by the accidental compelled to halt by the I'll read the sentence again. But as it happened, the car was compelled to halt when about halfway to the next stopping place by the accidental obstruction of a van that had broken down just across the track, and this delay enabled her to come up with it. She still could not see Leslie among the passengers, but she went on at a slower pace to the crossroads, that she might be there to meet him when he came down, and eventually she and Bobby reached the corner where the buses stopped a few seconds before the overdue tramcar also arrived. Several passengers alighted, but Leslie was not among them. In her amazement, Ruth positively made bold, knowing that the car must wait a minute or two, to run up the steps and scan every seat on the top with her own eyes, but the boy was certainly not visible. "He ain't there, is he?" said the conductor in good-humoured amusement at the little girl's perplexity. "I told you he'd been spirited away." It was a relief to Ruth, in one sense, to know that Leslie had not been as naughty as she feared, yet it only made his disappearance the more mysterious. He had not got off the tramcar. This she was quite sure. During the journey back from Heather Green, he did not get down at the terminus, and he had not remained on the vehicle. It really seemed as if, as the conductor said, he must have been spirited away. Slowly, with weary feet, having wandered hither and thither in their vain quest, until they were cold and miserable, Ruth and Bobby made their way back to Laurel Villas. Ruth felt as if she were in a bad dream. How dreadful to have to meet Mother on her return with the news that Leslie was lost. Yet how could he be? There was something too ridiculous about it. He had been lost off the top of a tramcar, like a purse or a parcel, or even a pin that might have dropped down a crack in the floor. Has Leslie come back? This was Ruth's first breathless question when Hannah opened the door to them. She seemed to have half expected that Leslie might somehow have been conveyed home, and it gave her a pang of disappointment when Hannah answered blankly, "No, ain't he been with you?" "Yes, but we've lost him." "Sorry," said Ruth. "He somehow disappeared. He got on the top of the car to come home with us, and when we got off he wasn't there." Before Hannah had time to reply to this extraordinary piece of news, Bobby, who had run into the sitting room, dashed out again with eyes like saucers and a shout of delight. "Ruth, Ruth, come and look. It's your fairy story, and they've come and they've got sugar on the top and all." Ruth and Hannah followed him inside. A large cake adorned with pink and white icing stood in the middle of the table. Ranged around it were a number of smaller ones, of the kind the children had often looked at and vainly longed for in the confectioner's window, some with fancy fruits on the top and some spread with chocolate, some heaped with whipped cream, while on either side stood Leslie's blue vases, each filled with a great grand bunch of white and yellow marguerites and feathery fern. "Why, what?" gasped Hannah, open-mouthed in amazement, while Bobby jumped up and down, waving his arms in rapture. Ruth was stricken dumb. All at once, the room became flooded with dazzling rose-coloured light. They all saw it, but Ruth felt as if it was swallowing her up. Walls and window and the bewildering spread on the table melted together in a crimson blaze, and the poor child fainted away. And that's the end of that chapter, and we shall have one more, but I need to just move a little and have some more of my coffee as well. So stay there. I'm going to put on the intermission screen, the Be Right Back screen. I shall then give me a couple of minutes. I'll dash off to the loo or whatever else I need to do, and then I'll be back and read some more. Okay? See you shortly. Right, I'm back, and I hope you are. That should have given you enough time to have a pee break. I'm just checking the other screen as well and catching my breath because I have to come up quite a long flight of stairs up to the office here. What else have I done in the break? Pee break. Got a snack because I didn't have one before. Cheese and a piece of fruit, and also put the vegetables in the oven for our dinner tonight. We're having a roast leg of lamb. It's my husband and I's wedding anniversary. So there you go. That will be what we're up to tonight. Anyway, carrying on. Right, I'll unwrap my piece of cheese because I am actually a little bit hungry. The stairs are really good for your heart and your legs, the muscles of your legs. Actually, and also the muscles in the back of your butt. It stops you getting all sort of like muscleless and unable to do anything. If you have to walk upstairs often, it's a good way to keep fit. Not as fit as if you're running and things like that, but it's still pretty good. And yay, my cheese isn't going all invisible because I'm not using green screen technology today. And those of you who know my house will be wondering why I have something behind me in the first place. There's a really big window behind me, and it doesn't work really well with having a webcam looking at a person trying to pick up what they look like when you've got bright light behind you. It really doesn't do very much for a good scene. And also there's piles of stuff that needs sorting. So they're sitting there behind the thing that you can see, which is the blanket at the moment. So, nearly. Sorry. Right, A Regular Handful by Jennie Chappell. Yes, read by Jev. And we're reading Chapter 8, Findings, Keepings. This is probably our last chapter for today. So the last we had was that a bewildering spread of wonderful food on the table. The room is lit up with a crimson blaze, and Ruth faints. Chapter 8, Findings, Keepings. For some time, Leslie, on that fateful ride back from Heather Green, had thoroughly enjoyed the unusual luxury of having the top of a tramcar all to himself. So this is what happened with Leslie while Ruth and Bobby were worried about him and trying to find him. So here we go. Or even before then. Thoroughly enjoyed the unusual luxury of having the top of a tramcar all to himself. He stood up and he sat down, he changed from one side to side, he occupied for a few minutes a seat close behind the driver, and then tried how he liked the corresponding place at the other end. He rode facing the horses, and again enjoyed a view of the scenery in the rear. Finally, he amused himself by walking from end to end of the vehicle with his sea legs on, and fancied himself promenading the quarterdeck of a rolling ship in the Bay of Biscay. So there you go. That's the bit I was going to explain to you before. It's a horse-drawn tram. So it's called a tram rather than omnibus because it uses the rails to keep the wheels in the right alignment. The horses are just used for power, not for any sense of direction or anything like that. And the driver is just there to make sure that everything keeps going the way it should do and stops when they should and so on. Horse-drawn tram car. And it's a double-decker, which was apparently quite common. They were pretty near the end of the journey when the car stopped a good while at a loop line, waiting for one coming the other way to pass it. At this point, a cluster of trees in the grounds of a private house grew so far over the roadway as to brush the heads of outside passengers as the vehicle passed under. As a rule, the branches were kept fairly lopped, but the house had now been for some time empty, and as the authorities were rather negligent, the boughs had been allowed to grow longer than ever before. There had been many complaints and sundry threats on the subject, but people said that until some, I'm just looking, I might be able to actually give you a picture of this in a minute. I'm just going to see if I can find it for you. There had been many complaints and sundry threats on the subject, but people said that until some important personage lost his hat or gained a black eye, the branches would not be removed. Yeah, that's the way things often happen, isn't it? People in authority will say, like, well, it's not really, they're saving themselves money. It's not really causing problems, so therefore we're not going to need to worry about this. Yeah, thank you very much. So, and we just ordinary people have to just put up with it until it does actually inconvenience somebody. So, yeah, it's quite an accurate observation, I think. And I am just about to find you this picture. I think it's one that I've already got. Sorry, yes, I didn't get this one sorted. Just checking what's going on my computer because it's suddenly very, very slow. Shouldn't be. Come on. My broadcasting software is paused, but I know it's still actually working because I'm watching myself on the other screen. It got past the point where I said, come on, and it still actually worked. So that's nice to know. Just a moment. Just checking that it's the right picture. Oh, yes, it is, but it's the wrong way around. I just need to turn that round for you, roughly. Try and do this on the fly. And then I'll have it available for you in just a very, very, very short amount of time when I get the right folder. Oh, goodness. Everything, when I'm working at home on my own, it usually doesn't seem to take so long. But when I know there's people watching, for some reason, it seems to take a lot longer, doesn't it? Yeah, that's just the way life is. Nearly there. It's actually the cover of the book that I'm reading, the copy of the book that I'm reading, is actually largely based on this one. Not the one that I'm actually using on my overlay, which is up there, which shows the car with the boy in the back seat. That's Leslie in the back seat. And everybody else, somebody in the front seat. And on that cover, the side of the car is bright, bright yellow. Very bright. I don't remember ever seeing any cars of that age that were that sort of colour. So we shall see what this works like. Not that version of it. We'll go back here again. Actually, no, we'll go cancel and then we'll try again. And it'll be quicker and easier to get to it because I won't have to find my way quite as far through the depths of this computer. There it is. And I'll show it to you in just a minute. I just need to get to that part of the story, okay? You're not missing out on anything. Trust me. Okay, right, here we go. We'll carry on reading. Now I've filled in a bit of time trying to do that. That's right. We're talking about the fact that whoever's in authority hasn't done their job and actually made sure that the trees are trimmed. There'd been many complaints and sundry threats on the subject, but people said that until some important personage had lost his hat or gained a black eye, the branches would not be removed, which is fairly accurate. Leslie was a great climber. For a town-bred boy, he was truly remarkable. Even when visiting the woods or forests around London, he had never found a tree that baffled him. People said he was born to be a sailor, for it seemed as if nothing but the rigging of a ship would ever satisfy his monkey-like propensity, and to this he quite agreed. As he sat therefore alone on the top of that car, with the green leaves brushing his shoulder, an idea popped into his head that immediately went tickling in delightful thrills all down his back and into the very heels of his boots. Nobody was about. No one would see him. He could certainly do it. The back gate of that deserted garden was generally open or on the latch to allow possible tenants to go in and look around, or if not, the wall was not too high to scale. That means to climb over. Then a run across a piece of vacant ground where a new road was being made, and he would be home before Ruth and Bobby. What a lark it would be to give them a surprise. They would never guess how he did it, and he would make them puzzle over it ever so long before he told. There was not much time to be lost. The car for which theirs had waited was already in sight. Leslie stood up on a seat and grasped the overhanging bough. With the dexterity of an acrobat, he contrived to get both arms and legs around it. And 2 minutes later, from a safe perch, why is that not showing? There, sorry. The colour tone's wrong because I had it set for a very faded series of illustrations previously. With the dexterity of an acrobat, he contrived to get both arms and legs around it. And 2 minutes later, from a safe perch up above, he saw the vehicle containing Ruth and Bobby glide away without him. So obviously this picture has not shown the branches down quite as far as they actually were. So there he is, he's climbing up. He's climbing up to, it's because the green screen, that's why. He's climbing up onto the branches that are overhanging from where this fence is along here is the house that the tree is growing out from, and that's where he's going to climb across to and then hop down. So he's quite plucky. There you go. And he saw the vehicle containing Ruth and Bobby glide away without him. Then he moved himself further and further along the branch till he was able finally to let himself down inside the garden wall of the empty house. This was a grand adventure. This was new ground indeed. The exploring spirit, inherited from his father, remember his father had disappeared because he was off on an expedition, took possession of him, and he proceeded on a tour of inspection. The garden, once well tended, was now rank and overgrown. The fresh greenness of early summer was struggling amidst the unpruned remains of last autumn and winter. Tufts of grass and groundsel, which is a type of weed, were flourishing along the edges of the gravel paths, and moss was already clinging in cushions of emerald velvet round the sides of the great stone basin where a fountain was wont to play. Sorry, just checking something. Leslie ventured close up to the house and peered in all the dusty windows. Nothing was to be seen within but the bare floorboards and the ghostly gleam of white marble mantelpieces. He longed to have another boy with him, that they might lift the heavy knocker and pull at the rusty bell, perhaps halloo through the flap of the letterbox, and run away. Oh, that running away with a sense of an unknown something behind you in hot pursuit. Can any sensation be more deliciously dreadful? That is, when you've got a trusty companion running with you. Alone, well, it is not quite so enticing. And Leslie found himself quitting the neighbourhood of those darkly staring windows on tiptoe. The shrubbery was more cheerful. Here the birds were twittering gaily and the sun shining in round patches of fairy gold upon the leaf-shadowed ground. In one angle of the path stood a fine substantial summer-house, supported on strong posts, twined with honeysuckle, and its high pointed roof, well thatched with straw, was prettily embroidered with the green rosettes of several thriving families of house leeks. It's a type of plant, sort of a succulent without being a cactus, and they seem to grow very well in thatched roofs and were used as decoration kind of somehow. It was a trend, a garden trend. House leeks, green rosettes of several thriving families of house leeks. Leslie, of course, went inside. There was a table and 2 rustic seats and the rather unnecessary broad beam which ran all round at the meeting of wall and roof, forming a shelf along which a row of giant pine cones was stood by way of ornament. Yeah, with something as small as that, it shouldn't need a giant beam. I'm just seeing if I can find you a picture of house leeks. And of course now my computer's going to be slow again, but this time with the browser. Yeah, exactly the sort of plant I thought. I must have looked them up once before. I'll find you a picture and then I'll share it with you. And you'll know exactly what I'm talking about, most of you. A type of succulent called a sempervivium, a particular general variety. There's a whole lot of different ones. But yeah, I'm just trying to give you a mental picture of what they would have looked like. Come on, come on, come on. There used to be a house down the road from us that had a whole lot of these growing on top of their letterbox. That's what it was. They had a tray. Copy image address, that's what I want. They had a wooden tray that they had made that was about this deep, and so it had a layer of dirt in it. And their letterbox had a roof that was at this sort of an angle instead of being a really steep one. So it was a bit of a slope, but by having the slope, it would stop it from holding on to water too long. So when it rains, if you've got a flat roof and you've got this tray, the roots of the plant, if you've got a plant growing in it, would rot because it would be holding it too tight for too long. Whereas what they did was they actually had it so that the plants were sitting, sorry, I'm just moving over so I can show you the picture. The plants were sitting on top of the roof of as part of the roof of the letterbox, and it was quite intriguing. There you go. Extra bright. Sorry, that's because my colour settings turned up. But these sort of things, they look a little bit like cactuses, but they're not. They can be a little bit pointy on the ends. Some of them don't have the burgundy coloured tips on them. They're usually a greyish bluey green rather than the bright green that you can see here. But that's them. Those are house leeks. And so they used to be clustered in some parts of thatched roofing just to make it look picturesque. Yes, just like our neighbours used to have it on the top of their letterbox, a whole lot of those. And ones that grow to different sizes. So some of them, the rosettes for the leaves are only about this big, and some of them, like the one that I showed you, the rosettes for the leaves are kind of, just try and get this so it's not going to hit a key on the keyboard and wreck things. So they're about this round, and some of them grow shallow, just little wee flat things, and some of them actually stand up a lot more. And then when they flower, they put up these skinny little stems with flowers on them. So yeah, can look quite nice if you're into that sort of thing. So house leeks on the roof, in the thatching of the roof. And now he's inspecting the inside of it. Leslie, of course, went inside. There was a table and 2 rustic seats and the rather unnecessarily broad beam which ran all round at the meeting of wall and roof, forming a shelf along which a row of giant pine cones were stood by way of ornament. He had come out of this building and was strolling quite confidently round the turn of the path when, to his horror, he heard voices and footsteps approaching. Almost at the same moment, he caught a glimpse of two gentlemen coming towards him between the trees. There was nothing for it but to dart back and hide himself in the summer house. Nowhere else to go. "Yes, it's a pretty place, only wants doing up," he heard one man say to the other. "I should be thankful to get it let, if only to be rid of the nuisance of the boys. They're always getting in and doing damage. I had 5 panes of glass broken last week, and just before that, the scraper and a watering can had been left outside were stolen." "You should put a caretaker in," suggested his friend. "Yes, I'm on the lookout for some reliable person now. Meanwhile, I'm often round about the place myself, and the first young rascal I catch here, well, he'll have a tale to tell his mates that will keep them off my premises for a while, I promise you." Oh dear. So Leslie does not want to get caught now. Leslie felt sick and tried to squeeze behind the doorpost. The pair were walking very slowly and were still some distance away, but their words came clearly through the stillness. "Shall we sit down for a few minutes?" suggested he who appeared to be the owner of the property. "There's a comfortable seat in that summer house yonder, and then I can lay before you more plainly the terms of the lease." So obviously the guy who owns it is talking to someone who's a friend of his who may actually borrow it, lease it. Ooh. We'll see. Leslie was desperate. In a twinkling he had jumped on the seat and clambered thence to the ledge under the roof, which I have already mentioned. Yes. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Mm. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Mm. Oh my goodness. Here he stretched himself full length, screwing into the narrowest limits possible. That means pushing himself hard back against the roof as far away from the front edge as possible so they couldn't see him, and trembling in every fibre. But there was small chance indeed that he would escape notice. One elbow stuck persistently beyond the edge of the beam, and his white collar, not to mention his almost equally white face, though he tried to hide it, made a point of startling prominence in the gloom. Nearer and nearer came the two friends, strolling as leisurely as though intentionally to prolong the boy's misery, pausing here and there to remark upon a tree or a shrub or to discuss possible improvements in the accommodation of the empty house. Leslie's heart, meanwhile, thumped until it seemed as if it would shake him off his shelf, and in his intolerably strained and uncomfortable position, his breathing became so hard that he feared they must hear it even before they reached the summer house. At last the pair came so close that Leslie, peering as he lay through a chink below the eaves of the building, could have counted the grey hairs in the moustache of the one man and the dots in the necktie of the other. Notwithstanding the narrowness of his peephole, Leslie recognised the visitor with a fresh shock. The owner of the motor car in which he had taken his uninvited ride a week before. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness gracious me. What's going to happen? What's going to happen? Let's come in here and sit down a few minutes again. Again suggested the master of the place, a big red-faced, fierce-eyed man who looked more than equal to carrying out his threats as to trespassers. I don't think there is much dust. Leslie held his breath till it seemed as if his head would burst. "Well, thank you," rejoined the other, "but the fact is I've been suffering a good deal from rheumatism lately, and I'm rather afraid of any place that is likely to be at all damp." "Nonsense, this place is dry as a bone," insisted the owner. "I wouldn't mind sleeping in it myself. See how well built it is." And he gave the doorpost, an inch away from Leslie's nose, such a clap with his huge hand that it set all the boys' teeth chattering. "I don't think I'll risk it today, thank you," replied his friend. "No wooden building of this kind can be absolutely proof against such heavy rain as we had the night before last. And besides, I have to get back to time. We are expecting guests this evening. By a certain time. I think I'll just have a look at the stables, then I shall have seen it all and had better be getting home." "As you will," agreed the owner, and to Leslie's indescribable relief, the two gentlemen moved away. He waited until their footsteps and voices could no longer be heard, then cautiously stretched his cramped limbs and let himself down, first to the seat and then to the ground. In so doing, he kicked something, not a pine cone, that was on the shelf. A small packet of some kind fell heavily with a rattle and chink, and when Leslie got upon his feet, he saw that several coins had rolled upon the pebble paving of the summer-house floor. He picked them up, 2 shillings and 3 sixpences, and half a crown. It was a newspaper parcel they had been in, just wrapped up, but not tied with string. Leslie opened the parcel, for these odd coins had dropped through a hole in the bursting paper, and there found 3 more half-crowns. That's a lot. 2 shillings, and 2 two-shilling pieces. 2 shillings is a florin, is one name for that, the type of coin. We used to have them in New Zealand. They were replaced by our 20-cent piece, which has since been replaced by a smaller 20-cent piece. 2 two-shilling pieces, 5 more sixpences, and 1 shilling. Precisely a guinea's value in all. We don't have guineas in New Zealand. This is Old English currency, not New English currency. Leslie stared and counted and rubbed his eyes and counted and stared again. It seemed too good to be true. It was like a fairy tale or a dream. Some of the coins were black with disuse, because they're silver. The metal is silver and it goes black. The paper they were in, damp and rotten, bore a date of 4 years previous, and it seemed evident that the parcel had lain hidden for some considerable time. To whom did the money belong? That is, of course, the first question that would have occurred to most of us. Yet, strange as it may appear, it did not occur to Leslie. His eyes gleamed with wonder and delight as, rolling up the money again in the soundest piece of the paper, he crammed it into his knickers pocket. A glorious windfall, a piece of treasure trove, and dropped down from heaven for him. Now, knickers in this context is what we would probably refer to as knickerbockers, not that anyone uses them these days. Trousers that are not full-length trousers, they come in at just under your knee. And so in the pocket of his pants. That's what they're referring to. Then, having peered in all directions from the door of the summer house to make sure there was nobody in sight, he darted out and round the shrubbery path to the side gate, which, from the outside at least, he well knew. As he had hoped, it was unfastened. There you go, it still is. All right, just checking something. As he had hoped, it was unfastened. A few moments later, he was running as fast as his legs would carry him towards home, full of excitement over his adventure and thrilling escape, but most of all exulting in the amazement and joy which he quite believed Ruth would share, of his marvellous accession to what seemed to him like a store of wealth beyond their wildest dreams. And that's the end of the chapter, and it's late enough to be the end of today's reading. Sorry about all the extra long pauses and things like that. The next chapter that we will start with, which is the one we'll start with next time, is called A Feat That Failed. Feat as an achievement, but it didn't actually succeed as an achievement, but not like feet that are on the ends of your legs. A feat that failed. Ooh, wonder what's going to happen next. Something to do with that money, I think. What do you reckon? Is what's he going to do with the money? Is he going to get in trouble for having the money? Is he going to have someone chasing him down because they know he's got their money? Is he going to use the money? How is he going to explain it to Ruth, his sister? Oh, so many possibilities. And you'll have to tune in next time. You'll have to come and listen next time to what's going to happen. And we'll see you then. And in the meantime, I hope you have a great week. Bye.